What is going on, guys? Welcome back to your Lake Fork Guide and another episode of the Guides Network. Hey, today we're going to break down all the in-depth details on how to fish Texas rig plastic worms in the summer. Probably the oldest technique that exists in the sport of bass fishing is going to be plastic worms. Those were really the first artificial lures that we had way back in the day. Started right here in East Texas. I always tell y'all, East Texas is the mecca of bass fishing, and the original plastic worm guys were Cream Lures right down there in Tyler, Texas. They're still in business today. Pretty interesting factoid there. Anyways, I think we all started with plastic worms as kids for the most part. It's the easiest thing to hand your kids. You can put a weight on it, make it easier for them to cast. It's weedless, they don't get hung up. When kids are first learning, it's just a great bait. But not only that, it's so effective really throughout the year and in any type of cover situation. I mean, fish just bite a plastic worm. And as you get into summertime, it becomes really important to understand the finer details to capitalize. When the bite starts getting tough later in the year, and it's not that the bite gets tough, it's just the bite gets condensed. There's less ways. You can't just go around and do anything you want to. Just go down the bank and catch fish. You really have to have some refined techniques to stay consistently good in the more extreme weather times of year. Summer's no exception. And plastic worms, specifically big 10-inch and bigger plastic worms, are one of the best ways you can go about doing that. Now, there's some tricks to it, and that's why we're making this video today. We're going to tell you all the different tactics, all the different areas, how you retrieve the bait, different ways to work the bait, different types of cover. I mean, everything you can imagine. We're going to try and cover all of that to the best of my very limited abilities today. But we'll go ahead and get started and get into it. Let's talk about the gear that we're going to use. Gear is pretty simple for a Texas rig worm. I think we've all seen a Texas rig plastic worm before. Now, before we go any further, as we're talking about gear, let's talk about the worm that I'm using, because this is a little different plastic worm. That's the Ridge Worm from 6th Sense Fishing. That's a different beast all in of itself. It was brand new last year. It's a really, really, really good kind of new innovation on traditional 10-inch plastic worms. It is a 10-inch worm, but it doesn't have the typical curled up swimming tail that unfolds and swims as it falls or moves through the water. This tail kind of undulates and has a more lifelike swimming action. You know, if you ever watch a fish of any kind swim, their body moves in a wave almost. Well, that's exactly what this flat tail design on this Ridge Worm does. It moves in a wave just like a fish would. Any type of fish, a shad, a brim, whatever, would move in that same type of motion. More importantly than that, to me, it's a different profile. It's a new look. And a lot of these fisheries in East Texas are extremely pressured. Lake Fork is no exception. Lake Fork, obviously, everybody knows the pressure it gets. So showing fish something different a lot of times can make all the difference in the world. Now, 10-inch worms have a long history on Lake Fork. I mean, there has been a lot of money won in hourly big bass tournaments, catching double-digit fish on blue fleck 10-inch or 12-inch worms. That has happened more times than any of us can count. And it still happens. People still catch them on the traditional ribbon tail style worms. But I gotta tell you guys, ever since I got this Ridge Worm in my hand, for me, my Texas rig worm bite offshore in the deeper water has gone up by throwing this 10-inch. Now, there's times when I'll still throw a ribbon tail when I'm up shallow and I'm fishing shallower water, I'm throwing like a 7-inch worm, then I'll still use a regular ribbon tail. And if they made this in a 7-inch, I'd use this up there. But there's something that happens to fish when you get to summertime. When you get into the summertime, it becomes, the hotter the water temperatures get, it becomes more and more important to that fish to feed efficiently and effectively. And a Texas rig worm, rigged up the way we're going to show you how to rig it today, moves very slowly through the water column. It falls very lazily, very slowly. It climbs up timber and brush piles and wherever you're fishing very slowly. It stays in their face a long time, and it presents a big profile in a big meal. Well, that checks all the boxes for a bass in the summertime, because as a bass's metabolism speeds up in the summertime and he gets more uncomfortable, more hot, less oxygen in the water, he starts feeling worse. He's really got to pick his battles and eat big meals and eat them efficiently in order to consume enough food to keep up with his metabolism, because bass being cold-blooded creatures, the hotter the water gets, the more they burn, the faster their metabolism works. So they really have to eat efficiently. And I really think that's the main reason that when we get to July and August, the big 10-inch, 12-inch ribbon-tailed worms are like the deal, man. They're one of the best things you can throw, and they're so effective that time of year because of that factor right there. So that being said, you can actually fish these ribbon-tailed worms anywhere in the summertime. If you're dock fishing, don't be scared to throw a 10-inch worm around a dock. If you're fishing a brush pile and timber are my two best places to fish them. If you're fishing grass, don't be scared to fish a 10-inch worm around grass, lily pads, whatever have you. It just presents a very slow-moving, easy target and a big profile, big meal. It's a very efficient meal for a largemouth in the summertime, and that's exactly what they're looking for. Okay, we've covered the ridge worm. Let's cover the rest of the gear. We'll start right here with the hook and weight. So I like to use a bobber stopper. We're going to talk about how I like to fish this worm in the summer. The majority of the time, I like to fish my ribbon-tailed worms or my ridge worms in brush piles and timber. So I'm going to use a bobber stopper to peg my weight. The reason I do that, if I don't, that bobber stopper's not here, when I drag that worm over a branch, see what had happened? Is my worm starts to go over a branch, that weight will fall away and it will cause that worm to be more prone to get hung up in those brush piles and branches on those trees. So I always use a bobber stopper. I'm using a 1/4 ounce weight. 1/4 ounce weight is what I use 99.999% of the time. If it's calm and the bite's tough and I really want to try to slow it down even more, I might go down to an 1/8 ounce weight. But a 1/4 ounce weight is what I'm going to use in the summertime on big worms most of the time. The hook I'm using, that is a 4/0 6-inch jugular hook. It's a straight shank offset round bend hook. But it's called the jugular hook. It's in the 4/0 size. It's made by 6 Sense Fishing. By the way, the ridge worm is made by 6 Sense Fishing. The bobber stop is made by 6 Sense Fishing, and that tungsten is all made by 6 Sense Fishing. You can find everything that I'm holding in my hand right here at 6sensefishing.com, as well as the rod I'm going to tell you about in a minute. And if you do go to 6sensefishing.com to order anything, be sure you punch in the code Your Lake Fork Guide. You'll get a 10% discount on anything you order. It's our way of saying thank you to you guys for taking time to watch this video. All right, rod, reel, and line. The rod I'm going to use is a 6 Sense Century Series. It is important, very important, very, very, very important. On this technique, your rod is the most important part. You got to have a sensitive rod. You can use a stronger rod than this. You could use a 7-1 medium heavy. You can use a lighter action rod. You can vary the power to your liking. I like the 7.3 heavy Century Series. That's the one I'm using. The main thing is you need a very light and a very, very sensitive rod. It's important to feel that bite early in the battle when you're dealing with brush piles and timber. It's important to feel that bite early, get the hook in the fish early, get him coming up as soon as possible before he has a chance to grab that worm and pull you further down into the junk. Sensitive rod. Spend a little more money on your worm fishing rod. Sensitivity is paramount on this deal. Century Series, it runs, I think the Century Series rods run about $250, and for the price, that is the lightest and most, it's actually the lightest and most sensitive rod I've ever used, period. There's some $450 rods that you couldn't trade me 5 of for this one right here. This rod is unbelievably light and sensitive. I absolutely love it. It's perfect for this technique to me. It's a little bit more high-powered rod than most people would throw a 1/4 ounce Texas rig on, but the deal is the rod is so light, you have no problem casting that light of a bait with it because of how light the rod is. So it works out that way. Line, I'm using 20-pound fluorocarbon 100% of the time, nothing else. On reels, high-speed reel, you want a 7.5 to 1, an 8 to 1, something like that. This is a Lew's Tournament MB. I also have another setup with this rod where I throw it on a Lew's Hypermag. You know, the reel, you just need to have a high-speed reel. Whatever reel you prefer. Both of my Lew's, every Lew's reel I ever had casts really good. And you know, the truth of the matter is this isn't a deal where you're making long bomb casts necessarily. I mean, at times you are, but most of the time you're just throwing at a target, throwing to a brush pile, throwing to a flooded piece of timber, something like that. So it's not really about length of cast, but Lew's Tournament MB, Lew's Hypermag, get you a good reel. Make sure it's in a high-speed gear ratio. The reason you need a high-speed gear ratio is you're never going to work the bait with your reel handle. You're going to work the bait with your rod, and the only thing you use a reel handle for is to pick up slack, reel your bait in, or reel a fish in. In all three of those cases, you want as high-speed gear ratio as you can have. So there's the gear. Now let's talk about the areas that we're going to throw these in. A lot of times in summertime, you hear us talking about points or road beds or humps or pond dams and structures. And that's the cool thing about plastic worms, man. These 10-inch plastic worms, you can throw Texas rig 10-inch worms on all that stuff, and you can definitely get bit. Like, the fish just bite. They've bit a plastic worm since the beginning of the sport, and they still bite it to this day. So you can throw, with your fishing road beds and humps and pond dams or what have you, you can throw a 10-inch worm on those and get bit, no doubt about it. And especially late in the summertime, like we referred to earlier, that's what those fish are looking for that time of year. I really like to get them in brush piles and timber. I feel like that's where they shine the most. I feel like when that worm can climb a limb and kind of hang there in that fish's face and then fall all of a sudden when it falls over, I think that's where the aspects of the technique shine the best and get you the most bites and the biggest bites, to be honest with you. The longer you can keep that worm in their face, and then the quicker it falls from that, you're going to get more reaction bites. You're going to get both the finesse bite of keeping the bait in the face and the reaction bite of when it falls over a limb. And so for that reason, I really, really like to fish these 10-inch worms rigged on that 1/4 ounce in flooded timber and in brush piles. And the cool thing about flooded timber and brush piles is they can exist anywhere in the lake. They don't have to be on it. You can get some out of the way stuff on flooded timber and brush piles. You can get some non-pressured fish at times. And that's something else you want to try to do late in the summer as fish start to become more lethargic and less prone to bite a little bit. You want to look for fish that have less pressure on them. And that's the other advantage of the timber and the brush piles. Is a brush pile doesn't have to be on an obvious piece of structure. It could be out in the middle of a flat. If you find that big brush pile out there, if it's holding fish, you can throw that 10-inch worm in there and catch them on it. Same thing with standing timber. In Lake Fork specifically, these fish are notorious. Now this year we're behind. I mean, the water temps are way behind on Lake Fork. We're getting a hot week this week, so it could kind of normalize a little bit again. But we've had so many cooler than normal weather that we're still behind on water temps. But Lake Fork is known, once you get to like July and August, especially when you get to the dog days of summer, water temp gets up around 90. These fish, a lot, and especially some of the biggest fish in the lake, will get out in some of these big flooded trees in really deep water, and they'll suspend in these treetops, and they may be 10 foot down, 5 foot down, 20 foot down, wherever the treetop may be, but they'll suspend. And if you go over there with your down scan, especially idle over the trees with a down scan, you can see the dots suspended in these trees. Now a lot of times you're going to see a whole bunch of little dots. Those are going to most of the time going to be crappie. But when you're looking on your down scan and you see like 5 to 10 or even sometimes 2 or 3 bigger dots that have a little more space in between them, that's what you're looking for. If it's a bunch of dots cluttered up real close together in a tree, that's crappie, maybe sand bass. It's not largemouth. If you see 5 or 10 or sometimes even 15, I mean, the number can vary, but a less amount of dots, bigger dots, and more space in between the dots, that's when you can kind of be cued in, okay, those are probably largemouth suspending in that tree, and that's when you break that 10-ounce worm. That you just waypoint that tree, you break out that 10-inch worm, you get in casting position using your mapping, and you make repeated casts to that tree. And I guess now is as good a time for me to get up on the front deck and show you guys how to properly work that bait through that timber or brush pile. You're going to work it the same way whether it's timber or brush pile. Let's get up and show you how to do that. All right, so we've got our tree marked and waypointed, and it's going to be right over around this area, right over in here. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at our waypoints, line up our cast, look at our Humminbird 360. If you're fortunate enough to have that, which I do, you can see the tree plain as day on Humminbird 360 when you mark them on there. All you want to do is make a cast about 10 to 20 feet past that tree. So we'll make that cast now. And then you see what I did there? I lifted my rod, I let some line come out. It's basically, I'm stripping line so that that worm will fall straight down behind that tree and not pendulum back to it as bad. And that's what you want. You want that worm to fall on a straight line down, so you want that worm behind that tree, behind that brush pile, whatever it is you're fishing. Now, when I drag this bait, if it's super windy, sometimes you have to drag to the side to be able to feel a 1/4 ounce weight. If it is windy, if you'll drag your rod to the side and keep your line low to the water, you'll be able to feel that 1/4 ounce weight a lot better. But when it's not too windy, if at all possible, I want to drag with my rod going straight up. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow that worm to climb straight up that tree a lot better. It's going to be less prone to stick the nose of that weight into a crevice. It's going to be more prone to climb up and go over, which is what you want. So you're just going to climb. You're going to climb, and every once in a while your line's going to catch on a limb or part of the brush, part of the tree, whatever have you. And as you do that, when you pull enough, it'll pop and release, and when it does, drop your rod tip and let that worm fall straight down. That's a key component. You want that bait to have a slow climb and then a sudden fall. So I'm gonna raise my rod tip straight up. It's catching, it's catching, it's catching. It releases. I'm gonna drop my rod tip and let it fall straight down the other side of that branch. You're really trying to keep that worm in that tree, in that brush pile, as long as possible. That's the whole object here, to keep that worm in that fish's face, in that fish's area, as much as you can. It's really simple, really simple fishing this stuff. You drag it through there, keep it in there as long as possible, and then when they bite, strip a little line so it'll fall down behind. When they bite, here's how we handle that. So let's say I'm dragging through that timber right now. If I get a bite right now, if I feel tunk, I'm gonna drop my rod, reel up my slack, and the reason I do that is so I get good leverage on my hook set, right? Wanna have good leverage. If I try to set the hook from up here, I'm not gonna be near as powerful. That's not near as powerful of a motion as if I reel all my slack down and go. Y'all can see how much more power, how much more force and velocity that is. And you always wanna set that hook that direction right there. You wanna set it up to your right shoulder. If you set it up to your right shoulder, that's gonna get that fish's head going up and out of the tree, out of the brush. And once you set that hook, just get that reel going and get that fish up. We've got a heavy action rod, we've got 20-pound line. We wanna get that fish up to the top, take control of him, and just get him to the boat fast as you can, and then boat flip him. Unless he's 10 pounds. You're allowed to net him if it's 10 pounds, folks. Anybody that says you can't net a 10-pounder, there's something wrong with them. I mean, I might even net an 8-pounder. I don't know. We'll see. I have boat flips and 8s and 9s, but I don't boat flip all of them. Hey, as far as colors go, you know, it's pretty simple. Black and blue is never a bad option. This is black, blue, and purple. You guys saw some Monday's video catching some out of brush piles on this right here, black, blue, and purple. It's called dark water bug. Green pumpkin is a must-have at all times on any body of water you're on. And then around here in this part of the world, especially at Lake Fork, plum apple. Plum apple is just a great color in the hotter months around here. And I also like to carry a green with some type of sparkle. This is green pumpkin burst. It could be watermelon red. I just like to have green with sparkle in it at times too. And those are basically, that's the 4 colors that I kind of keep. Green with sparkle, green pumpkin, black and blue, and then plum apple. Those are the 4 colors of plastics I use on pretty much all my baits throughout the summer. Sit on me, he's right around the boat. Oh, it's a good one too. Get on up here, babe. Oh, get up here. Boat flipper. Come on, baby. Oh, hell, I'm around your line, I think. Oh, no. We got a real mess here. Huh? How about this double up right here? Huh? Come on up here, Justin. Watch out for all them rods. Hey. So that's basically it. Pretty simple technique, pretty simple gear, but man, is it effective in the summertime. It's what those fish need, it's what those fish want. So don't be hard-headed, man. Give them what they want and go catch some more fish. Remember to go over to 6thsensefishing.com, get all this gear that we showed you today. Punch in that code, your Lake Fork Guide, get that 10% discount on all orders. Hey, thank you guys so much for watching as always. I appreciate everything so much that y'all do for us here at your Lake Fork Guide. We'll see you next time right here on your Lake Fork Guide.